doesn't want to face the facts, they should stand up and be clear with the Canadians, call a public inquiry.
We can talk about courage in this place, and it's very easy from the safe sanctuary here in the House of Commons to judge this, but the courage that I'm interested in is the courage of the Canadian Forces, the men and women on the ground in Afghanistan this very moment, fighting to protect our values both at home and abroad. We have forums to look at this particular situation, Mr. Speaker. We have people very qualified who have given evidence, Mr. Speaker. We've heard from senior members of the Canadian Forces, those within the Department of Foreign Affairs, those within the Public Safety Department, Mr. Speaker. I put a lot of faith in both the bureaucrats and the leadership of the Canadian Forces.
Okay, that was Liberal defense critic Ujjal Dosanjh debating with Defense Minister Peter MacKay about the Afghan detained issue. Of course, it was fired up again last week by the allegations of the language and cultural interpreter, Mr. Malgarai, who appeared before the Commons probe into this. Late last Friday night, the Chief of Defense Staff, Walter Natynczyk, issued a statement dealing with the allegations from Mr. Malgarai, and here's part of that statement. He said, in this particular case, the commander at the time considered all the relevant information at his disposal and made the determination to transfer all 10 individuals to the NDS in order to allow Afghan authorities to determine whether criminal prosecution was warranted. All individuals transferred were properly monitored and tracked through Canada's monitoring mechanisms. Okay, so that was a letter from the Chief of Defense Staff. Now, earlier today, Roger Smith from CTV News interviewed Mr. Malgarai, and this is what he had to say about the Chief of Defense Staff's letter. Take a listen.
I said in the Parliament that it was a murder. I'm standing my ground. It is a murder.
Why should Canadians believe you instead of Natynczyk?
Well, Natynczyk is a man of uniform, as he's trying to cover up. Because if someone was criminally responsible for that killing, then it's going to look bad on Natynczyk, and Natynczyk doesn't want that to happen. So men of uniform will not try to prosecute another man of uniform.
Okay, joining us to talk about all of this is Amir Attaran. He's here with me in the foyer of the House of Commons, law professor at the University of Ottawa, and also Mr. Malgarai's lawyer. In our Ottawa studio, retired Major General Lou MacKenzie. And that's where I'm going to start with you, General MacKenzie. What do you make of the Chief of Defense Staff's letter and the allegations by Mr. Malgarai?
Well, I'm amazed that, that we have two sides of the evidence here. From the interpreter, and believe you me, I'm not shooting the messenger because interpreters do very brave work for our forces in Afghanistan, but we're talking by his own admission of second and third hand information, people who he interviewed that saw something happen. And then you compare that to the people that were actually there conducting the operation for the Canadian Forces, and there is a distinct credibility gap here, and it falls in favor of the Canadian Forces. I mean, there is a significant amount of time spent investigating, documenting what happens in every one of these operations, and this one was over a year in preparation, and in fact a very thorough report after the event, and also just recently at National Defense Headquarters when they reviewed the investigation yet again. So from a credibility point of view, I don't have any hesitation whatsoever in coming down on the side of the Chief of Defense Staff's letter of 16 April.
Yeah, Mr. Attaran, what do you say to that?
I think it's complete nonsense. This isn't a credibility contest. It's a contest of facts. And the fact is that Mr. Malgarai was present firsthand, when the detainees who were witnesses to the murder were interrogated. In fact, he translated the interrogation. So he was closer to the original source of the material because he was hearing it in the original language. The Canadian Forces heard his translation, not the statement in the original language.
This is the murder of a 17-year-old Afghan individual.
He heard those interrogations even before the Canadian Forces did because he heard it in the original Pashto. He also heard the Canadian soldiers, if I may finish, thank you. He also
as long as you don't take too long.
A Canadian, he also heard a Canadian soldier's investigator who was tasked to investigate what happened call this a cover-up. He heard that firsthand as well. What General Natynczyk said, and I believe him, is that the episode is, quote, very well documented. Well, if it is, let those documents be tabled in front of the House of Commons as the House of Commons ordered months ago.
Let's bring in General MacKenzie, because you had a few comments that you wanted to make. General MacKenzie.
Yeah, I mean, this is ridiculous, tabling detailed investigation. I mean, we have soldiers operating in Afghanistan under specific rules of engagement and using techniques that are fairly well known that they can't discuss, but I can. For example, the individual who was allegedly shot in the back of the head. You have overwatch on this mission. It had been planned for over a year. Intelligence had been gathered. It was conducted at night. And somebody watching through a night scope as somebody enters a compound where allegedly IEDs are being constructed, and evidence indicated that was the case, and someone is armed and is in a threatening posture, he or she is going to be taken out, which is exactly what happened. But you don't have to publish the report and tell the Taliban exactly what your techniques are and how you prepare for these operations, who provided you intelligence, etc. That would be ludicrous, and it would be an insult to the protection that we should provide for our soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan.
General, you just don't get it. You just don't get it, General.
What do you mean I don't get it?
The report.
You called the CDS's letter nonsense, so that's you're the one that's not getting it.
Well, let's get
anybody that would speak to the CD.
General MacKenzie, if you would let me answer you, no one is talking about publishing the documents. What we are talking about as a legal requirement is that Parliament ordered the production of the documents. That's not an option, that's the law. They must be given to Parliament. And so far, the military, for over 4 months, has refused to abide by Canada's law, which is to give those documents to Parliament. When will the military stop breaking
that is
the law?
not what we're
That's
discussing. We're talking about the veracity and the accuracy of the information concerning this incident, which your client has accused the Canadian Forces of a cover-up and murder, which is crap. I mean, when you referred to the CDS's letter,
have you seen the documents? Have you seen the documents, General?
As ludicrous. I'm sorry, say again.
Have you seen the documents?
I said, well, Mr. Attaran's asking if you've seen the documents.
Well, why should I be entitled to see the documents? But I happen to know how these investigations are carried out and what's contained in it. You haven't seen the documents, I haven't, but you are repeating your client's accusations on a national network, and you referred to the CDS's letter as, for all intents and purposes, lying and a cover-up. That's something that is a very, very strong accusation that you cannot defend. And you're insulting the leadership of the Canadian Forces.
No, I'm not. What I'm saying is the Canadian Forces
you are. You just
are subject to the same if I may. You're terribly good at interrupting, but not very good at listening.
Well, I mean, you're a lawyer, so you should be able to cope with it.
If the Canadian Forces want to get to the bottom of this, and I trust that they do, then they won't rely on shouting down those who raise questions. What they will do, and what they must do, is provide the evidence they possess to Parliament, which has ordered it. Now, quite why that hasn't happened, I don't know. I know it's a breach of parliamentary law. It's illegal, if you're asking me. Yes, it is.
Well, and that's an area where you are focusing your interest. I'm not, quite frankly, concerned about that right now.
You're not.
What I'm concerned about is the evidence that's been predicted or presented. The evidence that's been presented. If you're not concerned about the law, then it is totally and absolutely inappropriate to refer to the Chief of Defense Staff letter in such a way that raises doubts about its honesty. That's what you have done. That's what you've done right now. Why don't you just call Natynczyk a liar?
I won't, because I actually was referring to your comments as being somewhat nonsense on this point. But
call the Chief of Defense Staff a liar.
Well, that's a point, though, because you are questioning the veracity of what is in that letter from the Chief of Defense Staff.
Well, what I'm saying is that we can do better than taking him at his word. He has said, General Natynczyk has said, this is a very well-documented episode. Fine, I believe him. I'm not saying he's lying. But since it is well-documented,
why is this letter nonsense then?
Let's have the documents speak for themselves.
Okay, last word to
rather than interpret it in this absurd vacuum of knowledge.
Mr. Attaran, last word to General MacKenzie. Go ahead, General.
If that's the case, then why call the Chief of Defense Staff's letter nonsense. The last time I checked, on various polls being done across Canada, the Canadian Forces were at the very top of integrity and trustworthiness with the Canadian population. I won't mention where lawyers were slated.
Polls are different from the law, sir, and you should know that.
We've got to wrap this up, gentlemen. I want to thank you. It's a very interesting debate, a very heated debate, as you can see, and it will be continuing on in the House of Commons. Appreciate your time.
Thank you,
Mr. Attaran, retired Major General Louis MacKenzie, thank you very much. And when we return, we'll have our strategist. Stay with us.